So my name is Cecilia Ottenweller. I am the convener of the Independent Folklorists Section, and I'm very, very happy to have all of you all joining us today for this program entitled Money Matters, starring our very own Sue Eleuterio. Sue is a professional folklorist, educator, and nonprofit consultant. She has decades of experience conducting fieldwork and developing public programs, including exhibits, folk arts education workshops, and residencies in schools, along with professional development programs for teachers, students, adults, and artists for schools, museums, arts education agencies, and arts organizations across the United States. She's also a fabulous professor in the Goucher MA in Cultural Sustainability program, where I thankfully had her enter my life. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Sue Eleuterio.
Thank you. And it's so good to see all of you. I'm going to share my desktop. Can everybody see that okay? Okay. I'm going to start with a disclaimer. I am not a tax professional. So any suggestions I make to you today or any questions you have about taxes, please seek professional advice. I want to be very clear about that. But we will talk briefly about taxes. What we're going to start with is introductions. And while I know some of you and you may know each other, I think it's always great to have quick introductions. I know we have one person who their microphone's not working, so feel free to put it in the chat. But what I'd like to do is start with introductions, and then we're going to do a strategy that some of you who've been in things with me before know that I use based on having been a lifelong writing instructor, and that's called KWL. What do you know about this kind of work? What do you wonder? And then at the end, we'll talk briefly about what we've learned as a form of evaluation. So, you heard from Cecilia a bit about me, and I will go ahead and show you a number of the organizations that I've worked with over the years, just not so much to whatever, but just to show the variety of kinds of places that you can do independent work. So I've worked for arts councils, I've worked for school districts, I've worked with state folklore programs, independent nonprofits, and university-based programs. So just to give you a hint. So could we do a quick round of introductions? Your name and why you're here.
Okay, I'll get it kicked off. My name is Cecilia, and we're going to do this popcorn. So I will name somebody who's going to go next, and whoever goes after that person, they name somebody. Okay. So my name is Cecilia Ottenweller. Like I said, I'm the convener of the Independent Folklore Section. I'm an independent contractor working in Houston, Texas. Some of my projects have included, I researched and wrote the institutional history of the Houston Zoo. I also researched the institutional history of the Houston Museum of Natural Science. I developed some exhibits, including all the signage for an Asian elephant habitat, and I had a career in marketing. And I have an MA in cultural sustainability at Goucher. What I know is that contracting is really hard, and it's something that I've really struggled with because I have problems finding work. It's kind of always I've fallen into. What I wonder is how to be more strategic about finding gigs and how to better manage my finances so I feel like I'm more of a success. And I'm looking forward to what I learn. Laura, would you go for next?
Yeah, thanks, Cecilia. Hi, Laura Marcus Green. I'm in Columbia, South Carolina. I've actually spent many years of my career as a contractor, as an independent folklorist, as a past convener of this section. And Cecilia, I will agree with you that it is very challenging. And I had been at the South Carolina Arts Commission and McKissick Museum here in Columbia for 8 years, and am now back in the indie status again. And so what I wonder is, how things have changed and what I need to learn now to get back into this work. And grateful for this opportunity. And I'll pass it off to Andrea.
Thanks, Laura. It's great to see you in Albuquerque. Andrea Graham. I live in Laramie, Wyoming. I recently retired from the university as a research position, so I was not a professor. I've worked for state arts councils in Nevada and South Dakota, and big chunks of my career, which is 44 years, have worked as an independent for a lot of times for state arts councils, for nonprofits. Those are the main ones. I've been on boards. I was on the Idaho Arts Commission board. I'm currently on a statewide preservation board. So, you know, I know how to work as an independent. I've never done it solo. It would be extremely hard to make a living by yourself without insurance and backup and another person's income. So that's something that I know. And I'm retired, so I'm really not looking for more indie work, although I'm doing a project right now. But I'm just hoping I can maybe provide some experience, you know, that might help some other people out. I will call on Sarah.
I'm Sarah Nelson, and I am right outside Boston in Waltham, Massachusetts. And my main work, such as it is being an author about musical communities, traditional music communities. And I've started doing a lot of oral history gathering around both my first book, which was on Max Hunter in the Ozarks, and I'm working on a totally different project now, and just learning that what I know is that people and institutions don't always consider this real work, even though we work really hard at it and we do a lot of preparation, etc. So I just wanted to learn more about how to go about kind of getting the buy-in of the supporting cultural agencies around my work to see if there's a way to be more business-like as I go about chasing down luthiers or musicians or whomever I'm gathering the oral histories from. So.
Thank you. Do you want to pick somebody to go next?
And I should, pick up so I can see who else is out there. Thank you. Rebecca.
Hi, I couldn't find my mute button. I'm Rebecca. I'm in Miami, Florida. And I just gave notice at my historic house museum, and I'm going into the independent world. C invited me because I've done a bunch of community partnership building through my the institution, and collected a lot of oral histories, preserving kind of cultural heritage in that way. And when I had a panic email, I was like, I don't know what to do. And C said, come here. So here I am, and I can feel that I'm blushing. What I know is that I have never, Andrew, you talked about this, I've never kind of been on my own to be an independent, earning my own salary. I have no idea how to do that. I'm certainly worried about that and what that looks like. And what I wonder is how to manage the balance between sort of my own ideals and values and kind of prioritizing what I think is important with balancing the reality that I need to be able to pay my bills too. And so thanks, C, for inviting me. Glad to meet all of you.
You want to pick the next
I
person?
had an assignment. Yes, I've already failed. So, Larry, how about Larry?
Larry, can you hear us and can you share briefly where you are and what you know and wonder? Or you can do it in the chat if you prefer.
We might have missed Larry. So Rebecca, do you want to pick another person?
Sure. I also see Roz on my screen.
Good morning, everybody. It's so good to be with you, and yeah, really good to hear from others about what brings you here, because it's very similar to what brings me here. I am in Exeter, California, and just got here over this past summer. And I'm in a transitional moment where I'm trying to figure out what the next best step for myself is, and yeah, just trying to learn more about what it would really mean to be a contractor and to work as an independent folklorist, and all of the same concerns are plaguing me too. So I'm really glad to be here and to learn. Thank you.
You want to pick the next person, Roz, or we can just...
Yes, thank you. I'm doing it too. Could we, how about Taylor? Thank you.
Thank you, Roz. Well, I'm Taylor Dooley-Burden. I'm the Interim Director of Traditional Arts at South Arts, and I'm also the Executive Director of Kind Folk, a folk and traditional arts program based in Southern Indiana, and Sue's actually on my board. So I love any opportunity I get to learn from Sue. When it comes to what I know, I feel really comfortable with grant applications and writing and doing a lot of the front end of the work when it comes to these sorts of things. But what I'm wondering is the finance management of it piece, and not necessarily how to manage a grant, but how to manage the independent contractor side of it, specifically when it comes to setting rates and, even trying to discern like what should be done as contractor work, what might be done under, like if someone else is like me and has like a small nonprofit, like under which umbrella to do the work. I know that it's really hard for me to set boundaries because where I'm positioned in Southern Indiana, so much of what I do is not necessarily my day job, but my life is pretty much embedded in folk and traditional arts work, because I'm also an artist and I work with a lot of artists in these communities down here. And so often I find myself doing things for free or saying yes to something and just offering to do it because I have the knowledge and I know how to do it. And I want to make sure these things are flourishing. So often I find myself saying yes and doing something for free or giving myself like a very, very modest like stipend or honorarium. And so just trying to figure out how to set those boundaries, but in a way that, make sure that the work can still get done, especially on this local and regional scale, while also, making sure that I can afford to do it. Let me see who else is on here. Anne, I'll pass it to you.
Hi, I'm in Silver Spring, Maryland, outside of Washington, and I am sort of, I guess, floundering on the edge of the field, and currently, I had a folklore job for indexing interviews for the Quilt Alliance for about a year and a half, and that went away because of lack of funding. And I'm hoping, from what they told me, that they might have funding again for January, but it still seems like a good idea to learn as much as I can about what my options are in terms of finding and handling work.
Thank you.
And just checking who hasn't
I
spoken yet.
think
Joe?
Denise and Joe. Denise maybe is going to do in the chat. Joe.
You want me to go now? I'm fighting a little bit of an allergy this morning. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead, Joe.
Oh, okay, great. So I live in Olympia, Washington, and I'm sort of hybrid, or I fall down between the, let's say, more formal folklore studies and being a performer, a folk musician, a folk storyteller. But I've done a lot of work in public radio. I was the founding director of the Youth Museum of Southern West Virginia in Beckley, West Virginia. And so I have worked for 45 years, basically, in many different capacities and ways of making a living. And I've been very lucky to have done that. I love what I do, and I've never really worked for anyone else, although I guess when I was running the museum, but it was kind of my shop to do that. So I'm innovative. I see opportunities sometimes that maybe other people wouldn't, and I feel I'm blessed. There's a lot of providential aspects to my life, which is great because I tell folk tales, and folk tales are full of providential events. That's what they do. Things show up at just the moment when you need it, and I love that idea, serendipity. Why I came on this to be here, and I know Sue a little bit, and a couple of things. Over this many years, you lose track of what people are charging for things or what the cost of living really is. I don't know why I've been so lucky not to think about money very much in my life. It just turns up when I need it, and I go on from there. So I'm curious what people are getting. Well, I used to do many school programs, telling stories, traditional folk tales with some fiddle music and some clog dolls. My wife and I performed. I've done that for many years. I've then worked into public radio. I have a public radio series about the violin and so forth. So I don't want to make this too long, but I'd love to know what people are charging for school programs these days, because I think that children are really in a critical state in terms of their mental health. And I find that folk tales and this kind of humor and lively, joyful storytelling is a tonic. I really believe in it. I think it's really important. So that's one of the questions I had. The other is my archive, which is over 150 interviews at present of violinists, violin makers, collectors, dealers, FBI agents from all over the world that we've done for the Rosin the Bow project. The University of Indiana has shown an interest in having that archive. And I'm not sure how to exactly do that, whether there's any money could be involved in that and what I could expect or not expect. It's we have many very famous people and very smart people that we've interviewed. So that's the other thing. And the last question I have, thank you for your patience, is like StoryCorps, I find that people come to me now and want me to record their family stories. That's the other public radio series I have. And I don't know what to charge for that. And I was looking for what StoryCorps, I think, has set rates. And I'd at least have a point of reference that I could say to somebody, well, StoryCorps charges this, or this personal historian charges that, so I will charge you X, Y, and Z. So those are my questions. Thank you for your patience. I had a long list there.
Those are all great wonders. Thank you. And I'm just going to, Denise, with your permission, I'm going to go ahead and read what you wrote, which is that you came to this after age 50. You've had a small fellowship for one project and an opportunity to apply for another, but it won't cover the bills. She's going back to school to update skills after caregiving for many years, figuring out a future for at least 10 more years by doing more writing and documentation. Learning more about how to charge is your wonder, and gaining more work experience. So thank you. Those are all great. And I've been taking notes. I think Cecilia's been taking notes too. So we will come back to those wonders, and some of them I think I've covered, and some of them we'll talk about in our discussion. And we've got some very skilled independent workers here, so I don't, need to be the only voice here. So please jump in when you've got information. And so I'm trying to share my screen. Is it sharing okay?
Yeah, you shared, it's working.
Okay, great. So thank you for that. That was really helpful. And also the no, the trying to figure out, how to set rates and to cover insurance, and this idea that the work isn't considered real, I think is another good point that we'll talk about. So So our agenda is, and we're right on time, so I'm tickled about that, is how we're going to how to develop costs. And again, I'm not an expert. I've done this, as you can see, for a long time in many ways. But so I want to draw on our collective knowledge. How to develop costs, how to set rates, how to create, and I put co-create when we talk about that, and negotiate a contract, and what materials and information you need to keep on hand as an independent contractor, or what is suggested. Just a little history here. In 1989, at the annual American Folklore Society meeting, the Public Programs Section, the State of the Profession Committee, and AFS prepared a draft proposal to encourage professional standards for the ethical and competent documentation of practitioners of tradition, along with rights for contract folklorists. And I'm old enough and been around long enough that I remember this. And these included the right to treat practitioners in accordance with ethical standards, the right to a fair rate of pay for the folklorists, or the contractors, the right to be compensated for contract-related expenses, the right to determine the particulars of the conduct of the research as long as the contract goals were met, the right to receive credit for services provided, the right to retain original notes and copies of all prepared documentary material, the right to subsequent use of documentary materials prepared for a given contract, provided that that use does not compete with the goals of the contract and that due credit is given to the contracting institution, and the right to protect the physical, social, and psychological welfare, dignity, and privacy of practitioners, and have share with them clear information about the collection of data by cameras, phones. Well, at the time they didn't say phones, but I added phones and recorders. So this is something that has been thought about for a while. And at the time I was a member of the Public Programs Section. I might have even been a convener at that point. We had hoped to put this in some kind of, really established form, but it got out there for a while, and then it kind of, I had to look for it. And Jim Leary very kindly shared this newsletter with me where this was published. So I just want you to be thinking, as we're talking about these various things, about these rights. And one of the rights that I didn't necessarily cover in the agenda, but I think it's a really important one, is receiving credits and being able to keep work, that I think is really important. And something that that I've been fortunate to do, but I think it's important as you're negotiating, when we get to the talk about contracts, to think about those rights as well. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that before we move on? And do feel free. We want this to be collaborative.
Yeah, I've got a question for you,
Oh,
Sue.
yeah. Yeah,
Going
please.
back to that, why do you think that this wasn't, what's standing in the way of this becoming a policy or an official document?
That's such a good question. And I always say I don't remember the 80s, because not for the same reason as other people. I had 4 kids in 3 years. Well, in 4 years, but I had twins. So I had 4 kids very, very close together. And I don't remember a lot of the 80s, frankly. And I hope I'm not being ageist if I guess that Andrea might remember some of this. But I think it just never got to the level of adoption. And it's something that I think we could consider as a group, or as a section, certainly bringing back, because I think that it is really important, especially for people that are just starting out in freelance work or contract work, or coming back to it, to be able to think about the fact that there is a need for rights. So one of the things I've done over the years, and I've been involved in a number of organizations, is really push the idea of a living wage. And one thing that happens, and I think Taylor, a couple of you alluded to this, one of the things that happens is we love our work and we love the communities we work with. So we tend to do a lot of things, out of the goodness of our heart or our passion for the work. And we often talk about the need to pay a living wage about other people, but we don't always talk about the need to pay a living wage to ourselves. And it's something that I think we want to think about as a right, you know, so. Any
So-
other, yeah, Andrea.
We did, when this group first started meeting about a year ago, we found that document and we started working on updating it and revising it and brought Jim Leary and Janet into the conversation, and then it kind of stalled out. But we did start to work on that, and there was an interest in having it posted on the AFS website, or somehow made official in some way. But there were a lot of things have changed. Everything's digital now. It's very easy to have copies of things. And there were questions about if it's work for hire, can you use it for your own things? And so there are a lot of details, but we did start that process.
Good.
Could revive it and try and keep it moving and get an updated version of that document. I think that would be very useful.
I'm glad you
Great.
brought that up, Andrea. That is something that we started doing at the beginning of last year, and we are going to pick it up again at the beginning of
Right.
this coming year. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you. I was trying to go to the chat, sorry. Yeah, no, and I think that it's something to think about the board of AFS, and also to look at other professional societies, which I did not do, I have to say, to see, how they've dealt with this. But thank you for that, Andrea. That's really helpful. And yeah, there's a whole, we could have a long discussion about keeping work and rights to work. But I'm going to keep going, and then, and I see in the chat, Cecilia, will you, so I don't get distracted, will you just go ahead and share things from the chat if I'm not seeing them?
Yeah, absolutely. Taylor was asking about the rate sheet that was once on the AFS website. We went looking for that recently. We found it, but it needs to be updated.
Yeah.
So, but it was kind of buried.
Yeah, and that was the other thing, is again, my memory of the 80s, which is a bit, right when this was published, I went through a soap opera divorce in addition to having 4 kids under the age of 10. So my memory was that this was all on the AFS website, but, like I said, my memory's a little bit suspect for that.
Well, one thing I want to add is that
Yeah.
there's a discussion about the website and what's up on the website during the conveners breakfast at the conference. And Jessica made a comment that, yeah, everybody does have a story. Jessica made a comment that we have not lost the things that were on the old website. They're all kind of in storage, but it just requires combing through them to find them. So there's a lot of stuff that used to be on the website. It's not up there right now. We just need to go kind of revive it.
Okay, thank you. So, one thing I thought would be helpful before I go into these specific categories, is the concept of RFPs. And you may all be familiar with them, but it's the kind of terminology. One of the things that happens in this work is you have to get used to jargon, right? And Joe talked about working in schools, and I did about half of my career working in schools. And if you want to see jargon, look at school, anything to do with schools, especially, well, I was going to say especially K through 12, but really university level too. But so I just put this up here. And Taylor, I hope this is okay. I just took a little summary from an RFP, a request for proposal from South Arts, which was a recent proposal that went out for Central Appalachian Folk Arts and Culture Initiative. And I'm just putting kind of the things that were in the RFP, because I think as you're starting to think about this, I thought it might be helpful. So there was a background, there was a scope of work, deliverables, the field worker attributes, what they were looking for, a projected timeline, travel guidelines, selection criteria as to how the contractor would be selected, and an equity statement. And I just thought it might be helpful to just this is a relatively recent RFP, just to start because I'm breaking things into these pieces, but they all need to come together when you do this work. So any questions, comments about that? And we'll make sure to make these slides available to you. So, so I'm going to jump into Sorry, I'm trying to shrink this a little. I'm going to jump into developing costs. So when you're starting to think about your costs, and I believe this was one of our wonders, right? Is you want to think about everything that you need to make your life okay. So you want to think about health insurance. You want to think about your transportation. If you're traveling to a work site, you want to think about travel and lodging. You want to think about meals. You want to think about equipment need, and you want to think about what wage you would earn if you were full-time. And we're going to talk about setting rates in a minute. This is something that a lot of us have not been used to doing. I'm going to make a broad statement. And like many of you, I have bounced between full-time jobs with all these things and working as an independent. And I think it's really important, again, back to the living wage idea, that you really think about all of your costs. Do be aware that many independent contracts have already set the rates of pay, or they've at least got a budget, because they've written a grant, or and so you do need to analyze if the costs to you are worth the pay. At the same time, I want to say that one job usually leads to another. So if you're just starting out, or you're reestablishing yourself in a particular area, whether it's geographic or subject, it's worth it sometimes to take a bit less pay to get your name out there. So, you have to, it's a balance. Everything about this is a balancing act. You want to estimate the time it will take you to complete the work or project and assume it will take longer than you think. And kind of to Taylor's point, especially if you're working with people you love or a community you're a part of, or frankly, just because I think the nature of the work that we do, it will take longer than you think. And the AFS article noted that you want to get paid for the actual time you spend. So, that article, which I will also be glad to send anybody, points out that often when you're contracted, it's for an 8-hour day, but the truth is you're often working overtime. So especially if you travel for a job, which I've done a number of times, you're not doing your laundry or cleaning your house or taking care of your pets or kids or whatever if you're somewhere else, right? So, your time gets your time, especially if you're traveling, gets used up. So think about that. And then Lisa Rathje, who's a folklorist that I think many of you know, but she developed, when she first started freelancing, she developed a template for sanity because she had a young child, which included her daycare costs, the time frames of the job she was doing with a calendar and deadlines. And I have imitated the template for sanity. I don't, other than babysitting as a grandmother, I don't have childcare costs. But I have childcare commitments sometimes. So I encourage you to think about that. And I'm sure Lisa would be glad to share her template, or I can share, what I've developed. And some of you, I think Cecilia may have developed a template for sanity. I feel like you might have told me that at some point.
I'm kind of natively chaotic. Sanity is always tenuous.
So anyway, just in terms of costs. So before I move on, does anybody have any questions about just the piece of developing costs? This all has to be interrelated, of course.
So one of the things that I've heard before in another field is that in estimating projects to always add an additional 30% of time to the estimate that you come up with. Have you found that that's a reasonable amount?
I don't, because I'm an English major, not a math major. I have not come up with percentages, but I think, and I'm going to give you guys a couple resources, but I think that it's not a bad idea to have some kind of a ballpark like that, where because we love the work, right? That's so we tend to want to make it happen. But especially for those of you who've talked about, doing this full time and trying to balance, you do need to be somewhat businesslike, which is another piece of the world that is harder for some of us. So any other comments or questions about cost? Okay. So setting your rates. So it's helpful to consider setting a basic rate. And for instance, I charge $100 an hour, which may sound crazy, but I've been able to get that. And now I have experience. But I think it's important to consider a basic rate so that, again, so you don't get, and I don't mean this in any bad way, but sucked in to doing things because you love whatever it is, the topic, the people, the area, the practice. Like Joe, I'm going to pick on you as a musician, but one of the things that's interesting about about work is that often people will surprise you. They'll actually pay you. My daughter-in-law, for instance, I'll just use her as an example. She's created her own design business, and she puts up theme-related designs for nightclubs and restaurants. And she was doing a bunch of work, and she got a bid from another restaurant group, and she gave them a high rate because she really wasn't sure she had the time, and they paid it. And so then she thought, well, damn, I should have charged more. And I don't think she'll mind that I'm telling you that story. So, you can also look at similar rates in your area. And another suggestion I have is ask folklorists who do similar work. And I'm going to show you some salary sources. So then another thing to think about is a very basic, and it is a federal established, at least for the time being, rate, and that is 67 cents a mile. So if you're driving, that is the federal travel rate. And no one's gonna probably blink an eye if you put that into your rate, because it's a federal rate, it's established. Again, in 1989, in that article, it was suggested that the going rate should be commensurate with what other professionals in a similar line of work are paid. Historians, exhibit designers, photographers, anthropologists. And I'm going to show you in a second a source. Now, I did look at there is a source for looking at rates. You don't want to know what historians are paid. It's a little depressing, but we'll talk about that. So here's this is the government, this is a government source that shows you averaged rates for a variety of careers and employment categories. Maybe we ought to work on getting folklorists in there. So it is interesting because, again, if you're feeling uncomfortable or you're feeling like I don't even know where to start, you can start by looking at the rates that people in similar professions are paid. Now, again, we have to take into geography, we have to take in the budget of the people you want to work for and with. There's a lot of considerations. And then the Glassdoor also has a salaries index for annual salaries. So if for the couple of you are either starting or doing this full time, one of the suggestions is to sit down and decide what would be a livable income for yourself for a year, and then try to break that out. Now, I'm not saying that's easy, and I'm not saying you're going to do it in a minute. But again, this idea of professionalizing what you're asking for, I think, is important. Any comments or questions about setting rates? And again, we probably could do like a whole hour on that, but
I have a question.
yes, please.
So your $100 an hour rate does sound crazy to me, only because I'm so young and I can't even imagine charging that. But I know that Teresa Hollingsworth also does $100 an hour, and I know that our work is worth that much. But especially for someone who is not only younger in years but has less experience than someone like you or Teresa, like, how would you advise someone without as much experience to create a rate for themselves? Because I don't think I could charge $100 an hour, of course.
Well, and that's the other trick is you might be able to. And Andrea might want to jump in, but again, it depends on where you are geographically. So, if I'm working in Chicago or I'm working in a big city, those rates don't get the eyebrow raise that they might in southern Indiana, for instance, or in a more, rural area. So I think, again, what I would suggest, Taylor, is maybe trying to figure out what's a livable income for a year, and then try to break that out into by month, and then break that into by week, and start to think about, okay, if I'm going to commit to a job that's 4 to 7 weeks of, work, what would that rate break? And so then the other thing you can do is set a day rate, and I've done that in the past as well. And I will tell you, Taylor, in the past, I used to charge $300 a day, which is not $100 an hour, as you could probably see. So that was, again, back when I didn't have as much experience and I wanted to do the work. And I often also had like a part-time job, when I was doing that. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Any other comments about
I
rates?
could weigh in on this a little bit.
Please do,
This
Joe.
is such a difficult area. Now,
Yeah,
of course, you have at the back end of this is when you ask for something and then they say, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. Of course, you're thinking, well, I could ask for more. I mean, it's a really neurotic territory to work through, is setting rates. This is probably the hardest thing going. I have accepted the fact that I work in this nonprofit sector. I work with
Yeah.
libraries, museums, and I find they're kind of kindred souls in most cases. The person I'm dealing with is usually wants this thing to happen. And so I often will throw it back on them. And I'll just say, look, I want to do this. You want the work done. You maybe never have hired somebody to do something as unusual as I'm going to do. So they don't really know rates. And I'll say, if you really are flat out honest with me, what you can afford, I can tell you whether I can do it or not. And I find that often has been to my advantage. People really assume your situation. They understand how unknown territory this is. And that has been very effective for me. Not always, but it has been very effective.
great point, Joe. I really agree with you. Especially, working with schools. I think that's been very true for me. And the other thing is sometimes you find out what other people are getting, or your contract, and you're like, oh, so thank you. That's really helpful. Any other comments about setting rates? It is the most difficult area. Okay. So, and the next piece of this is creating and co-creating and negotiating contracts. So the contract may be created by the organization requesting the work, or you may need to create your own contract. Either way, you want to make sure you include the following: a detailed scope of the work, including any field logs, photographs, recordings, final reports that they want you to include. And again, one of the things that's hard for us to do, but it's important, is if you're going to write a final report, you got to put the time in that's going to take to do, because as you all know, writing a report takes time. You want to have a detailed time frame for beginning and completion. You want to have a budget, which includes a detailed payment schedule, again, with your costs and rates. And one of the things that I think is worth exploring is, can you ask for some money up front, and then some money, depending on how long, if it's a year or 2-year contract, you might want to think about a midpoint payment and then a final payment. And again, we're not the only people doing this. This happens in other fields. And then any additional requirements. So for instance, when I've done university work, sometimes they want you to be registered as a contractor with the university. So you may have to, go through their development office or their contract office. It's not a bad idea to put a request for a 1099 in writing, because I have, and several of you may have, had that request that 1099. The 1099 we'll talk about in a minute, but that's the federal reporting form that reports that they paid you, and you want that. And then finally, a thing to think about is who owns the right to the work produced. So I would include personally written credit for your work that must be included whenever your work is presented, reproduced, or summarized in a public forum by the contracting institution. And I got that from that 1989 article, by the way. You also want to ask about the rights to use materials produced in subsequent contracts on your profile and on social media. And this is really important. And one of the things that I learned early on, because I was contracting with artists actually for my first full-time professional job as a folklorist, I learned to make sure we talked about copyright. Because I took, just as an example, I took a photograph of an artist who I'm still good friends with, for the school programs he was doing. And then he gave that to a local free paper, and they reproduced the photograph without credit to me. And while I'm not a professional photographer, I consider my work okay. And I think I should get credit, when my work's produced. So I think it's important to think about the rights, how the material can be used. Certainly work that I've done like with schools and for state arts agencies, I've wanted to be able to use that work in other subsequent work. Because I created the work. I created the outline of the work. So, you want to think about all of that when you're creating a contract. Any questions or comments about creating contracts?
Yeah, this is Cecilia. This is
Yeah.
something I unfortunately have had to deal with. The book that I wrote for the Houston Zoo, I had it in my contract, but one of the things that ended up happening is that the project moved so fast that everybody was like, yeah, we're fine, we got it, everything else. They self-published the book and they did not credit me on it.
Oh, no.
It, right? And I had to go back and they had to instead just recognize me on social media. But it wasn't something that they published for sale. They only gave it to donors and their staff. So there's no way to go back and reprint it or anything else like that. So this is really, really important.
And I can't see the chat at the moment. So is there anything in the chat that we need to cover? Okay.
I can say one thing about
Yeah,
that.
please, Joe.
I had a story that was fundamental to our prosperity, and that was I was approached we did a lot of work with radio drama in the schools. Had a fellow approach me asking if I could come up with a radio drama curriculum that would sort of discourage tobacco use among young people. And immediately I had the whole story. It just popped into my head. Oh, Sir Walter Raleigh. Somebody goes back in a time machine and gets Sir Walter Raleigh and brings him to the present, shows him all the trouble, and tobacco companies try to stop. I just knew the story. So I said, yeah, I can do it. So we got $1,500 in our budget. And I knew I'd have to hire actors, go in a studio, and I had to write it, research it. But my mother had a lot of trouble with, tobacco. It took her life, and an aunt who died from tobacco. And it's something I was passionate about. So I said, okay, here's the deal. How do we do this so you get your needs met, but I retain rights? And they said, well, we just want to air it on the local radio station for the schools to listen to. I said, okay, I'll sign those rights over to you, but I hold the rights to it. Eventually, the state of California became aware of what we did, and we were offered a $330,000 grant to go statewide. And I made enough money on that, and I trained and went around the whole state, but it was a down payment for our house in California, which we couldn't afford. So it's really, really important to pay attention to rights and be very, just like, well, we can work with you on that, but we retain this. This is, otherwise you're selling your kid to the circus, it's like selling a story to Hollywood. That's what they say. It's like selling your child to the circus. You want to really think about it. That's my insight.
No, that's really great. And the other thing I'll say is, and I'll find this and I can send it to everybody, but so I worked with community-based writers for 10 years as a workshop leader. And we had a pretty good rights statement because we published a journal called the Journal of Ordinary Thought, but they kept the rights to their work. And the Library of Congress Folklife Center has a really good rights statement that includes future, I forget how it's worded, and I should have looked it up for this, but it includes future innovations that haven't been invented yet. in terms of, because constantly, right, there's things being changed, and we all have to think about the AI at this point. So take a look at the Library of Congress Folklife Center's rights statement. Because one of the things that as you said, Joe, you don't know what the future use of something might be. So you want to think about that when you're negotiating. Any other questions or comments?
Some of this comes in release forms. If you're doing
Yes.
interviews, folklorists tend to say, especially if it's a performer, somebody who's created their own work, or an artist, the copyright belongs to them. If you're working for an oral history organization, they like to say the copyright goes to the organization. Had big arguments about this doing various projects, and had to tweak some release forms. In one case, we did a field school in Grand Teton National Park, and we were going to give them copies of our archive, but they required that copyright belonged to them. And we said, we're not doing that. So the archive is at Utah State University. It has public access. But that's something, that rights issue can come up in other ways besides the contract, depending on the kind of organization you're working with.
Good point.
It's
And
my understanding.
there's one other question there. What about the people being interviewed? Where do their rights fall into this? Because
Right.
you're doing an oral history. I'd be curious what people think about that.
Well, folklorists tend to leave those rights with the person being interviewed. Oral historians tend to want to put it in their archive, and that they have the copyright. And I think if they can use it for educational purposes, if someone comes into that archive and wants to use it for profit, they have to get permission from the interviewee. So that is there, but it lets the archive do whatever they want, within reason. And folklorists generally don't have that stipulation for their archives. But then my archive with my release forms went into our archive at the university, which tends to own the copyright stuff. So I don't know what they'll do if someone wants to use that stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's an ongoing issue, and because I live with an artist and I work with a lot of artists, it is really important. And again, one of the things to think about is the tricky part of a lot of this is anticipating what your future needs are going to be, right? So you may be fine at the moment with with saying, yes, organization X can have this, but you may down the road want to be, again, like I said, I did a lot of work in schools like Joe, and I developed a bunch of workshops for kids on folk traditions and folklore. And when I worked for the Missouri Folk Arts Program, we created a statewide curriculum. Well, I put some of my curriculum in there. And I didn't think to say that I need to retain the rights to this curriculum, but I've just gone ahead and used it because I had published it previously. I just assumed that I had the right to it. But again, take a look at the Library of Congress, because they think about this a lot. And I think we're increasingly, and it's probably another day's discussion. I know we did a brief discussion of this with the Midwest Folklorists and Cultural Alliance workers, and there's a very, very good piece I can find for you by an oral historian about the benefits and the dangers, the good, the bad, and the ugly about oral AI and oral history. And one of the things he says that's good is it can go through and catalog collections of oral history much faster than a person can. One of the bad things is this whole issue of rights. So, it's something to think about.
So
anything else on contracts? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, I think Rebecca had something she was going to add. Oh, you're fine? Okay. I'm going to put, I just pulled up the Library of Congress rights and access page. Is that what it is that you're talking about, Sue?
I'd have to see it.
Let me put it, I'll put it in the chat real quick.
You can share your screen.
Oh yeah, well I guess I could do that. Oh yeah, that's that. I have that power. Okay. Can you
Yeah,
see?
no, it's interesting, and I think it does apply to what we're talking about, but what I was talking about is a release form, back to Andrea's point. a release form that includes, you know, I forget the wording, but that it includes mediums that haven't been invented yet, which I think is really interesting and important. And I don't think I can do it quickly now, so.
Is it in there, the latest version of the Folklore and Fieldwork guide? Because I know there are sample forms
It
and
probably is.
probably
And
in
then, yeah, yeah.
that's available online on their website.
Thank you. Great.
You're welcome.
Okay, so here we go. Okay, so thank you. This is great discussion. This is just put in some sample requirements from a contract that was out in 2019. I'm not going to tell you who it was. I just put it out. I thought I'd put it up to give you some. So in order to be considered for this contract, the contractor candidates must submit the following documents: a cover letter detailing qualifications and relevant experience, an executive summary, a CV or resume, examples of similar projects completed, 3 references who can speak to their experience working with this contractor in this capacity, a comprehensive work plan detailing the contractor's approach and methodology to complete this project, a detailed budget that articulates a proposed fee to accomplish the work, including the contractor's time, material, and supplies, travel, and any other expenses, a fee schedule. And then it just talks about the review process and that these are the criteria. I just thought this would be helpful to see. So if you're creating your own contract or co-creating a contract, this is the kind of material that organizations may ask for. And I thought it would just be helpful to kind of see, the detail of what you might have to submit.
This feels like a lot.
Yeah.
And I think about this in my own work at my current museum, what we ask people to do to just even get an opportunity to be reviewed. And I wonder whether you build that buffer into your rate. Like, how long is it going to take me to submit any kind of proposal?
Yes, yes. Yes, I think that's I think as you're thinking about rate, and again, when you're feeling, oh, am I worthy to, create this rate of whatever it is an hour or day? Yeah, you have to think about the front end and the back end of the work. And I think that's a really excellent point, Rebecca. Thank you. Because to find 3 references and make sure they know what they need to write about, to create a comprehensive work plan, to create a detailed budget and a fee schedule, it takes time. And I have to say, in my most recent contract, I didn't front end because I work part-time. I'm in a position where I don't need to cover every expense, but I think it's important if if you do, that you think about that. I think that's a really good point. And the other thing, I'll just point out is, so they're asking for this work to be done between October 2018 and December 2019. So the other thing is, if you're doing this project A, do you have time to do project B and C, which you may need to have a living wage, So that's why I love Lisa's, and I saw that someone asked for it. I'm sure she'd be willing to share it with us. The template for sanity. I thought it was so brilliant because it's hard especially when you're just trying to get going or you're trying to return to independent work, to think about all this stuff, but it's important to think about that.
I think the psychology of this is very important. And I don't want to, take too much time talking about it, but it's really, I think, essential what I've learned over the years. In folklore, you're kind of in a gifting culture. I mean, that's what it has always been. If somebody taught me a fiddle tune, they didn't ask a right. Like, well, I taught you that tune, so make sure you credit me when you play the tune. I mean, that's the nature of this work that we're doing. When you get into the contractual world, you will find very quickly that that's where power starts to get wielded. They will come to you because you've come to their attention. They think you have a gift for this thing you do, or they don't know who else to get. So they come to you and they sort of, it's like the courtship thing. oh, you're beautiful, you have great hair and all this stuff. And then you get the prenup. I mean, it comes in and they will switch the power arrangement over to them so fast. And so, and you've got to see this coming. Same thing happened with book publishing. You get an agent. Oh my God, I finally got an agent. I'm going to get my book, and you've had a discussion with them that's an oral discussion where you thought you were all on the same page, had same values. You get the contract, they want everything and your child. They really do. And then they expect you to fight back and say, well, wait a second, you can't have this and this. They expect this. They're going to get as much as they can. And so it becomes transactional. This is anathema to the world in which you like to live. Why you've picked to work in folklore is you don't like this shit. You really, excuse my English, but you really don't. And so it's really difficult. That's the psychology of it. I just wanted to say that.
No, Joe, and I love the gifting culture because it's true. We mostly do come from a gifting culture. And as you said, people share their lives, their traditions, their work, their everything with us. And it is, I think it's difficult to figure out. And I know when you talk about book contracts, I mean, I did a chapter in a book a couple years ago, and I had photographs that really mattered to me to include in the chapter. And they wrote to me, and they didn't write to my editor, who's a fellow folklorist, that the pixels weren't enough. And so they dropped several of my photographs. And I happened to be in the Amazon at the time. I was volunteering in the Amazon. I didn't have access to the internet. And I was so ticked off because, these photos were really important to what I was trying to say. And I'm a visual person and we have a visual medium. But they were very cut and dried. It's too late. You can't put them in. That's it, So yeah, I think it, and this is not to posit anybody that we do work for as, an enemy, but I think you're right. I think the prenup, the prenup metaphor is very, very apt in some ways. Yes, you're in love, but it's a relationship and, you may need to think about it. So I appreciate that. Any other comments before we go on to kind of what to keep? Thank you, Joe. I love your metaphors. Okay, so material or stuff to keep as an independent contractor. You are self-employed, and this is straight from the IRS website, by the way. The earnings of a person who is working as an independent contractor are subject to self-employment tax. To find out what your tax obligations are, visit the Self-Employed Individuals Tax Center. Generally, the person for whom the services are performed must report payments to independent contractors on Form 1099. So first of all, make sure you know that you want a 1099. I've done all kinds of stuff over the years. I had a really good accountant back in the day, and she was fabulous with helping me know what to deduct from my taxes. The rules have changed quite a bit, and I wanted to give you guys like contemporary rules. And the interesting thing about the IRS, God love them, is the current self-employment page calls the page where it talks about, like, for instance, a home office, historic. And I'm not exactly sure what historic means. And that's why I put my qualifying statement at the beginning of this presentation. I am not a tax expert. I'm not an accountant. I highly recommend talking to local nonprofits in your area and find out if they use an accountant. And, it's not a bad idea to talk to an accountant when you're thinking about what kinds of materials you need to keep. But I would certainly say keep copies of release forms, signed copies of any contracts you sign in your 1099 forms. Do keep a record of your travel and other costs, and keep a copy of your work products. And as we said, while your work may be displayed on the organization's website, things change. So you want to keep your own copy. So for instance, there is work that I did for a couple different state arts councils that's no longer up on the web. So it used to be if I wanted to show somebody, my work, I could just point them to the website. Well, that's not true anymore. So I think it's very important to try to, you know, keep copies of your own work products for a variety of reasons. And again, the rules about what you can deduct have changed, and I think they're partly dependent on income. Because I'm married, I jointly report, so I'm not the best person to give you that advice. So again, my recommendation is it's worth it to maybe talk to an accountant. And there are I'm trying to think what they're called. In Chicago, I know there's a group that works in the arts that helps with nonprofit finances. You might do some research on that in your area of who helps with nonprofits with their finances, because those are usually people that kind of like, to Joe's point, are part of the gifting culture to some extent, and they might be willing to sit with you. Any comments or questions about this?
Yeah, I would add, this is Laura. I found when I was doing a lot of work when I was based in New Mexico, and that's a whole other landscape, because they also have sole proprietor. There's an additional sole proprietor tax, which is on top of, and we learned in New Mexico to add some of that to our fee, to cover those costs. But I found someone who specialized in working with independent contractors, because the ins and the outs are so complicated. And another thing is, I got audited again because of this New Mexico special tax, and I realized kind of pretty far into the game that I was filling things out incorrectly, and so I had an audit that went back a long time, and I was so grateful that I had all of my documentation, because I needed it. I needed to prove that the income I had earned was outside of the state of New Mexico. It was Iowa, Louisiana, all over the place, and so I would err on the side of keeping too much.
Thank you, Laura. That's really helpful to know. And
I would think, someone who worked with, you're not a nonprofit, you're a business, you're a small business.
Right.
So it's different from nonprofit, but I deducted anything I could think of. Folklore books, if you pay your way to AFS, all of that, as membership, subscriptions, and professional things. When I was doing freelancing full time, that was my only income. Like, I deducted a new computer. I'm trying to think. I don't think I ever did the office deduction. If you have a dedicated place in your house, you use the square footage, and you can deduct your rent or your mortgage and a percentage of your utilities. And I never went that far, but all kinds of little things, office supplies and
internet. I've in the past deducted internet.
So think about everything that you need to run your business. And I kept this giant spreadsheet of all my expenses, and I kept up with them. And then I divided them, look at the tax form and see, because they say they break down certain parts of your income. And so I have columns, one for travel, one for meals, one for, supplies. See what the categories are and split your records up. So then when you come to do your taxes, and I always did my own taxes, it's slotted right into those you have to do a Schedule C if you have self-employment income. So it's, it's a bunch of extra work, but if you keep up with it, it's totally worth it when you come time to do your taxes.
Yeah, no, it really is. And the reason I didn't go into more detail is it's changed a lot since I was doing it full time. So I wanted to be cautious, but again, I think your points about business, and again, one thing you can do is look for folks who do have their own business, and who do they use, as an accountant or support. So you're right, it's not the same as a nonprofit. I kind of mentioned nonprofits only because they tend to be in the same, like, I know I'm on the board of a nonprofit in Ohio, and we have an accountant who does work for small organizations, and I feel comfortable asking her questions. But yeah, you want to make sure.
One thing that I learned, I put something in the chat that the day after I got my first contract, I went and hired an accountant because I'm a writer. I can't add my way out of a bag. So, and I basically said, keep me out of jail. But one of the things I learned is that to keep a spreadsheet, I'm terrible at keeping that spreadsheet. But to actually collect everything, I carried a little purse with me that I would stuff every single receipt that I could with it. The taxes did change, however, with the previous Trump administration. And so a lot of the stuff that I was able to deduct last time, I'm not as able to do.
Right.
We go ahead and go through the exercise, and that includes all of my mobile charges. I have this little 6 foot by 8 foot little office that's mine. My computer charges, the QuickBooks Self-Employed has been a really good app to have on my phone because you can just quickly take a photograph of your receipt and it'll log it for you.
Well, that's
But
neat to know.
yeah, so that helps a whole lot.
Those are great. Thank you. Yeah, it's changed. That's why I was cautious, because I know it changed relatively recently. Rebecca, did you have a comment?
Oh, no, I have a question. I'm not sure what my question is because it's going to sound weird. Are you all individual people or are you LLCs or are you like, how does anybody do any of this?
I always found it simplest to just do it as an individual and file a Schedule C and not do the paperwork to incorporate or whatever. That's a really good question. And maybe some people have made a different decision, but the extra complexity, to me, it wasn't worth it,
Okay.
Same for me.
Joe here. My wife created this thing called Hardy Heart Cards. She had me record over 150 jokes. I've been a great collector of jokes all my life. And these are the longer classic story jokes, with punchlines. And then she did the artwork for them and put them up, kind of like Jackie Lawson, where you could send cards to people. We feel like everybody's so depressed right now. A little humor would go a long way. So she created this thing, Hardy Heart Cards, really put her heart and soul into it, hired a programmer because it was complicated and so forth. So we considered this LLC thing. And we talked to some people, and my brother was a lawyer. He's passed away, but, got his advice on LLC. And it has some it had some protections in terms of somebody where, I'm going to sue you for that joke, I mean, maybe there were protections. But then I talked to somebody who really understood that world. And they said, once you're in it, it's really hard to get out of it. And that was a way we had not thought of. And he really gave me, chapter and verse on that. And we said, no, that's crazy. So we didn't go there. So I hope that's helpful.
That is, thank you. Thanks. So other, additional thoughts. One thought I had when I was finishing this up was, when I went independent, I created business cards, and I know that now we have virtual business cards, and I haven't figured out how to do it yet, but I know it's on my agenda. And one of the things I thought about was what to call myself, because those of you who are folklorists know that we always have to explain it. I mean, I remember the first time I went to an accountant and I put folklorist down as profession, and I had a long explanation to do with the accountant. So I came up with folklorist, educator, and consultant to nonprofits, because those are the kinds of things that I've done and that I wanted to keep doing. So for those of you that are going into this or going into this, one of the things to think about is, what kind of title you want to give yourself. And I do encourage a multiple title, because I'm very proud to be a folklorist. I'm very proud. I have no problem explaining what a folklorist is. But I also sometimes feel that if I add those other, lines, that it gets me into work that I might not get otherwise. And then they figure out the value of having a folklorist. So, that's another little bit the thing to think. Another thing I want to say, and I'm going to go back and look at your wonders, but is the idea of looking for work. And one of the best things I did, and I've done and continue to do, is try to attend either regional or local meetings. So Andrea knows, and Laura, I think, knows, I'm a Midwestern folklorist, but I used to go to the Western State Folklorist group retreats because we only met every other year, and the Western folklorists had great professional development. I learned so much at every one of those retreats I went to. And the other thing that happened is I ended up getting work because I did a statewide curriculum with Lisa Higgins from Missouri. We presented at a Western folklore conference, and I then got work from Troy Geist in North Dakota doing curriculum with traditional artists. So yes, it's an expense, but again, depending on, I'm not a tax accountant, I'm not, a tax professional, but you can, in the past, you were able to take some of those costs off of your work as a self-employed. And it was really beneficial to let folks know about projects and then get other projects. So I think that there's a real, I guess I call it the piggyback effect of presenting about the work you're doing. And again, now these days we have more and more social media opportunities to do that. So, you might think about putting a YouTube channel together. I went on TikTok and then my son gave me a hard time, so I'm not on TikTok, but you might think about, I don't know why he gave me a hard time, but you might think about doing, a TikTok about your work. Because I do think that, part of all of this is, how do you continue getting work? I know and maybe Cecilia wants to talk about this briefly, and I'm watching our time, but the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies folk arts piece has just presented at the AFS meeting about then Denise says going to a state museum conference in another state was where she found out about the fellowship she received. So yeah, any kind of conferences. I mean, for those who work in schools, and Joe, you may have done this. I used to go to the this National Social Studies conference and present, and that would get me work. National Council of Teachers of English. Anyway, Cecilia, you want to talk briefly about this new kind of initiative with NASA?
Horse trade.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
So occasionally we have sort of horse traded for a trade booth at like the California School Library Association. They had hired me as a keynoter to come in and talk about impact of media on the way we teach and how it influences children. And and then we did a radio play for their banquet. So we were going to be quite involved. They had a limited budget. And we said, well, why don't you give us a booth as part of the fee? And they were delighted to, because that didn't really cost them anything. They had the space. And we met many people that would come by, had seen me speak, so that it was integrated. But, this was a wonderful opportunity to meet people that has come into their school districts and do things for them. Our strength is in personal relationships, and physical personal relationships is the strength of what we do. And as much as I have podcast series and I have all this stuff, I don't really find work comes to me through that, really hardly at all. I mean, maybe somebody that I meet will look at that and say, oh, this is the quality of the work. They can judge what I do. But it seems like all the work that's ever come to me meaningfully has happened through physical meetings, or maybe a phone call, but a phone call where you can talk to somebody on the phone. Zoom, I mean, this is even weird. I mean, these new technologies are promising all this networking, but it doesn't really work, especially for people in our field. I was thinking earlier, I've never really joined the Rotary Club, but I've certainly spoken to Rotary clubs and Chamber of Commerce's. Those are great places. I mean, that's where every insurance salesman goes to, to get work. These are places where folklore does happen, and we have to almost explain, this is our problem, to somebody saying, oh, you have this organization and you're the owner of this plumbing supply company that's really quite large. He's retiring and his kids are taking over. Maybe you want to do an oral history about the project and what this has meant for the family and this community. Well, you have to seed that idea to them, because they didn't even have that idea. But they meet you in this informal situation. There's I think kind of a magic. I mean, I really believe folklore is full of magic, and these things happen. That's how I find work.
No, I agree with you. I agree. And I want Cecilia, I'll just say that I was asked to be a pitch hitter at a Chamber of Commerce meeting for Gary, Indiana last year, because somebody bailed at the last minute and a friend asked me. And I presented about the folklore of the area, and I ended up being asked to join a board. You know, again, because somebody had no idea what I did or what I knew about. And I think Andrea mentioned, you know, I do think volunteering, and again, you have to watch your time and you have to do that what's the word? There's a ratio.
Cost benefit, yeah.
Thank you, cost benefit ratio. But, you know, I think being on panels for state arts councils, again, somebody gets to know about you and the work you do. They're always looking for panelists. Yeah, Rebecca, the story, somebody had no idea what I did or knew about it. It's the story of my life. Yes. And I think all of us in some ways, but you know, again, the more we're out there, as Joe points out, the more we get, you know, I did a consultancy for a high school, because they got a grant from the State Arts Council to do cultural understanding. And I ended up getting hired there as a teacher eventually. So Cecilia, you want to jump in about the new initiative with NASA and Independent?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, there's a couple different things I want to tell you guys about. First of all, we had a fabulous partnership with the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies this past year. And they partnered with us with the release of our very first Independent Folklorists Directory, professional directory. The godmother of that, Lucy Long, is here in the meeting. So Lucy, do you want to do a brief introduction about what the directory is about?
Sure. So, you know, part of what we realized, you know, folklorists tend to do so many varied things. A lot of us don't even know what each other are doing, and we don't even know what skills we all have. Plus, a lot of us, including myself, would go back and forth from being independent, you know, to being, you know, full-time contract at the university or with a project. You know, so a lot of us have these kind of nomadic professional careers, you know, and so part of the idea was first of all to let other folklorists know who's out there, who's available, what our different skills are. You know, and a lot of us have experienced something where, you know, if we're on the fringes in an area, you know, and in my case, Columbus, OSU gets all the money for things, you know, and I'm on the fringes, I'm 2 hours away. And, you know, so a lot of us, you know, feel like, you know, we're not being seen by other folklorists even. So, and then definitely by people outside of folklore, you know, most of them would not even think that folklore could be useful to them. So the idea of the directory was to try to bring all that information together, you know, partly to let other folklorists know, you know, that we're here, and then also to send out to the world. Let them know the incredible variety of skills that folklorists have, and the variety of topics and things that we deal with.
Thank you, Lucy. If you are not a member of the Independent Folklorists Section, you are missing out, people. So make sure that you put yourself on our list. Make sure that you've got my email. It's in the chat. Send me a note if you're not getting Independent Folklorists information. And I'm going to end the recording now. And Sue, thank you so much. This has been an amazing presentation.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you for everybody's participation.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for the co-contributors. And please feel free to email me with any questions. And it was great to see all of you. And we'll keep moving forward.